And I think that that's where organizations struggle is they look at standing up an analytics solution as a one-time thing. I climbed the mountain and now I'm done. What am I going to do next? Like, I've done it. And that's where they get stuck in these doldrums of maintaining the current implementation. And it's
Welcome to 33 Tangents, a roundtable discussion covering a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Naran, Jen Coons, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world, but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others. So what's going on? What's new?
not a lot. I'm tired of the winter. We're having stupid smarch weather.
Lousy smarch weather?
Lousy smarch weather.
I said that the other day, and Suzanne's like, smarch weather, so I had to explain the joke. And I think of Homer Simpson like, coming in, lousy smarch weather.
I know, I shouldn't complain, but man, it's just been, we went down to Vegas for a few days and thought, it'd be a nice little break, get some warm weather, and it snowed in Vegas while we were there. I was like, I just can't get away from it. Come back, and it starts raining, and we had, I don't know, 18 inches of snow out on the grass, and it started raining, and it all melted. I'm like, the bulbs started to, come out of the ground a little bit. I'm like, okay, this is nice.
Yeah.
And then it snowed again.
We had snow Sunday into Monday. And it started snow. So Sunday was Suzanne's baby shower, and it started snowing as we were trying to load up the cars and get all the stuff back to the house. So we were loading up the cars in the snow and then unpacking all of them in the snow. But it was like that heavy wet snow that it snowed like that for maybe about 2 hours. Got some coating on the ground, got a couple inches on the ground, and then it turned over to sleet and freezing rain. So it just kind of packed it down. It was that heavy stuff. I know Boston got a foot or maybe even a little bit more. I think Todd was saying, he was digging out from 14 inches of snow. So we just got the band that quickly changed over. That being said, Monday, the sun came out and a majority of the snow melted then.
Yeah. I'm ready for spring, man.
Oh, I am too. I'm ready for spring and summer. Bring it on.
Yeah. Hopefully Vegas around Summit time will be a little bit nicer, and you'll get to enjoy some warm weather.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it because chances are it'll still be a little chilly when I take off from here. But when I land there, I'll be in jeans and a sweatshirt or something like that, and have to get to the hotel and get cleaned up and put something not a sweatshirt on.
Yeah, hopefully a t-shirt.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but I'm looking forward to Summit. It's gonna be fun, and just getting into the warm Vegas weather.
Yeah. Yeah, should be good.
Yeah.
25,000 people or something crazy.
Exactly. Get to see what's new, and I will say I do miss Summit in Salt Lake.
I know. I was just about to tweet a picture of it, but I haven't. It showed up on my Facebook memories from 8 years ago, and even 8 years ago it was starting to get pretty large, but I had some pictures that I took of pre-summit activities. That was always my favorite, the day or so before everyone else showed up, just a core group of people would be around and we'd just hang out and spend some time in the Gibson Girl Lounge at the Grand America, and it was just really quiet before the craziness showed up, and I miss it. I miss that small thing, but when I started at Omniture, the first summits were, I don't even know how to describe them. Up at the ski resort in the mountain, they were so tiny. I think so. Bret Gundersen, and I don't even know. You know what? I'm gonna multitask while we're talking and look up his title. Director of Product Management, Adobe Analytics at Adobe. So he was giving a session, and it was a really popular session at my very first summit, I think. and it was like almost like a classroom setting. We were all sitting in desks, and there were probably 18 people in the room. And that
Mm-hmm.
was one of the like really popular sessions. It was
Oh, cool.
so tiny. But
Because 2011, you were just talking about 2011. That was the last year at the Grand America, correct?
I can't remember. It could have
Because
been.
2011, because 2011 was the first time I went out
Okay.
for it, and I remember, we stayed at the Grand American, and it was really nice. I was like, wow, blown away by like this hotel room, because typically at that time when I was traveling for work, was not getting the super nice hotel
Yeah,
rooms.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was getting like a Comfort Inn kind of thing. Nothing against Comfort Inn, but
No?
it wasn't anywhere near like a suite kind of room.
Yeah, the Grand America's. I mean, it's by far the nicest hotel I think in downtown Salt Lake, and it was fun having Summit there because when like NBA teams come through, or if there's like music acts in town, they usually stay at the Grand America. So I think
Yeah.
there was one year that Ben Gaines, the Boston Celtics, I think were in town, and Ben Gaines ran into Big Baby in the elevator and got pictures with him. And I
That's
think one
awesome.
year one of the NBA teams crashed the like Summit Bash. I can't remember. So yeah, that was always fun. I think that was the last summit that I formally attended.
Mhm.
I was up in Salt Lake when it moved over to the Salt Palace, but just hanging around. But I don't think as a formal attendee.
Yeah,
So
because then I was there 2012 in the Salt Palace, and that's when it started to feel really big. And
yeah,
because I do have like the memories of 2011, it being a bit more intimate, and just being able to run into people, find a corner, and talk for a bit.
yeah, yeah. Was that also the year of the Atomic Sushi Challenge?
That was 2012.
2012. Okay,
Yeah,
classic.
2012 is when Randy, myself, and another guy, George Trinidad, went and did that.
We may have mentioned that on a previous podcast, but it's such an amazing story because before like you and I really even knew each other,
Hmm.
and you were working at 33 Sticks still, like that was such a story that Randy and I would talk about all the time, and I'd bring
Hmm.
it up, and then I think I brought it up with you, and you're like, yeah, that was me, I was there. I'm like, what?
I was the ringleader.
Oh my
I was the one that was
gosh.
dead set on it. And I wasn't expecting anyone to do it with me. Just like, let's go out to dinner one night and let me go do this. Randy jumped in, and then we peer pressure, via peer pressure, got George to do it. And the next day, it was worse than a hangover, just because like, your stomach, it tore it apart.
Yeah, man.
And the next day, like I'm like, that was probably the worst decision I've ever made. Like that was the dumbest thing I've ever done. It makes for a great story.
Oh,
Don't get me
amazing
wrong.
story.
It's one of the icebreakers I use. But still, probably one of the dumbest things I've done.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely getting excited for conference time. And as always, I think that makes a great segue into what I want to chat about today. Because typically at conferences, that gives a chance, whether it's the host company, whether it's their conference or any of the partner vendors there. This is when they debut new features, say new tools, whatever they've got coming out. And I feel like one of the things that you and I run into very often at 33 Sticks, but I've also run into for years, is we either have a company that has a tool or say a suite of tools that are in place, and no matter how much work they put into them, the tool doesn't fit their needs, but they don't move on and find a better tool. They just continue to sink money into this tool that doesn't work or whatever. Or we have a company that switches tools and vendors the minute there's a sign of trouble. They don't go through to say, okay, what is truly the root cause to make this tool really fit our needs? So you have those two kinds of scenarios, and neither of them are good or healthy. You're either sinking a ton of money into something that just will never work for you, or you don't give something a chance. And like some say, the initial bumps in the road you have, the initial bumps in the road that you have when you implement it, you don't give those a chance to settle out. So really, what I want to focus around, and the title I'm working with this one is when is the right time to switch to a new tool or vendor? When should you consider that? And when you do consider it, what should be taken into account before making a firm decision to stay with it or a firm decision to move on? And then to get even deeper, are either of these two scenarios, the staying too long with a tool that doesn't work or changing too frequently, signs of a bigger organizational issue?
Yeah, I mean, so many different ways that we can take this. And we should note that Jim's going to have to play a challenging dual role today as both moderator, interviewer, and panelist because it's just the two of us. John had
Yes.
some other things to take care of, so you're gonna have to both ask the questions and answer the questions this time. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation, and like you said, we see it a lot. So actually, let me step back and talk about the areas that we see it pop up the most. You mentioned two of them, but maybe that will kind of start a conversation and we can go down one of those paths. But we see several different scenarios, and I don't know that any of them are really taking the full consideration into consideration, the full impact into consideration before making a change. But it can be anything from really being forced to make a change, I guess, would be a scenario we've definitely seen. So as we've seen companies that have struggled to make their revenue goals, companies that are laying off their workforce and are cutting costs, that's definitely a driver. And that happens a lot. In fact, the implementation that I was the most proud of, that I did at Spark Networks, so that's where I worked client side for upward of 6 years. I think that was the driver there. And it was after I had left, but I'd built what I felt was like this amazing implementation that I was proud of. The company went through, and probably is still going through, some really, really bad financial times. They cut a ton of staff, and their investment in analytics was one of the things that went, and completely just ripped out everything that I had built. That was sad. But we've seen that happen at other companies, and unfortunately companies that we've worked with, that's happened. So just from a pure budget standpoint, which I think that brings up a whole other conversation. So let's earmark that to say, how critical is analytics to your organization? So if you're in cost cutting mode and we're trying to recover from bad economics, bad revenue, is analytics something we really want to be cutting? I don't know. So that's another conversation. But so that's one scenario. Another scenario is what I've called like the new coach scenario. So if you think about sporting organizations, typically when you hire a new coach, they like to bring in their staff, right? So you hire a new coach, all the existing assistant coaches and trainers and everything, they typically get fired, or they've gone on with someone else and they'll bring in their own crew. And we've seen that as well. So I may be a Google Analytics shop, and we hire someone new to run our analytics program, and they're a huge Adobe advocate, and they say, you know what, we're bringing in Adobe, or vice versa. We've seen it many, many times. So that happens. So that's number two. Number three would be, I don't have a good analogy for it, but it's when you get upset with the current date, right? Like, it's like the current situation you have. It's really easy to be upset at everything that they do. The grass is greener, it's like, oh, well, if I was, I'm on Adobe, and if I was with Google, this would never happen, and so, like, usually it's just talk, but sometimes it does move over to action where it's like, you know what, we're done with Adobe, we're moving to Google, or vice versa, or any other platforms. Usually usually the grass isn't greener. But that is definitely a driver for switching. I don't think of a really valid one, but is a driver for switching. The most valid one that I see is just outgrowing your current solution. So we've risen to a level of maturity, and we're pushing the envelope on our current solution, whether it's homegrown, whether it's a SaaS vendor, and we're just starting to run into challenges, whether it's with connecting our data across our ecosystem, or doing more advanced analytics, or doing things like personalization. And so you start thinking, maybe I need to look at buying a more sophisticated solution. That one, to
Mhm.
me, really is the most valid reason to make a switch.
Yes. And I think that's also, if we were to kind of start to break these down, because I posed two different scenarios, one where they don't move on, but then one where they say move on too frequently. I think outgrowing a system, I've actually seen it, at least I feel like I've seen it where they've reached that point of outgrowing it, but they've put so much time and money into it, they don't want to start over. So it's like, how do we continue to hack this system? So I want to come back to the outgrowing in a minute, because I want to dig into two of the other points that you brought up. The new coach slash general manager, and that's an analogy you and I've used many times.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most common. But I also want to dig into the grass is greener
Okay.
scenario,
Yeah.
because I think those two scenarios may lead to the deeper question I asked about, are these symptoms of much deeper issues within the organization? And I mean, my immediate response to the grass is greener scenario is absolutely.
Yeah.
Where there's, there's always the, this new solution will solve these problems. So we need to jump to the immediate solution. And ultimately with that, I think that that's a symptom of either you don't have the proper skills in-house, so a new solution is always an answer to a problem, instead of figuring out, okay, is this something we just need to architect the tool a bit more to do, or whatnot.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point, and I think it's oftentimes the output of lack of experience of analytics leadership in a company, because it is fairly easy to drive excitement and interest around something new. We all get
Oh,
excited,
absolutely.
right? Yeah, we all get excited
Yeah.
about something new. And it's just like in life, you get something new and you're excited, but that newness wears off fairly quickly. And then
Especially when the maintenance factor comes in,
yeah,
maintaining something and keeping it up.
agreed. And that's really what separates long-term success from not, is that maintenance factor, and it comes into play in so many different things, whether you're starting a business, whether you're building a product, whether you're building a service within your company. It's relatively easy to start, and you're propelled by that excitement of the newness of things, but that's not what makes the difference. What makes the difference is, once that excitement wears off, what are you going to do? And unfortunately, we've seen that a problem in many companies, where once that newness wears off, due to lack of experience of the analytics leadership, then they have to find a way to rebuild that excitement. So it's either, let's look at new tools. Um, let's look at re-implementing our existing tool, because that may be new. But whatever the combination is, it's not maintaining and really grinding out the value in your existing platform. It's trying to keep that newness, right? It's trying to keep that sense of, this is the first time, and it's just really difficult. And I think that unfortunately happens many times, and it may be an unpopular belief, but I truly believe that that's what's also leading to such a high turnover rate in analytics, is that it's really fun to start something new, but once that newness wears off, it's difficult to really drive the value. But it's there, it just may not be as fun. I tend to disagree, but I've got to the point where I've found that actually doing something really hard is where the real enjoyment is. But you have to switch your mindset to make that happen. But when you do, the outcomes are so much richer and more enjoyable. And again, I'm rambling here, but I think that that's a huge problem that we're dealing with, where that newness wears off, and then all of a sudden everything else starts looking better. You could have an amazing platform, and there's so many good analytics platforms out there today, in the enterprise space, in the startup space, whatever you're looking for, you can find a platform that is really good for your business and needs. But it doesn't matter how good they are. You know, once you get in there and you start having to grind things out, the grass does start looking green. You're like, oh man, that other girl looks so much cuter over there, and I bet she's so much less maintenance than the one I have now, right? And so you start thinking maybe I should make that switch.
So as far as the maintenance piece goes, because I think that's where a lot of organizations struggle with this. Because let's face it, maintenance can be mundane, it can be boring. What what are maybe some scenarios where you've come across where it's like you're coaching an organization through, um, for lack of a better word, being excited about maintaining the current solution?
I think it's
Uh,
a change in perspective, honestly.
mhm,
And if they're looking at it as maintenance and we've completed what we set out to do, it's going to be really hard to like get them to where they want to be. So from my perspective, and when I'm talking to organizations, I try to change the conversation from maintenance to a conversation around becoming the very best at what you do. And by that I mean just because we've accomplished X doesn't mean we're done. And now we're just going to
mhm.
maintain X. There's more to mastery of what we're trying to do. So I just watched, as a side note, Free Solo last night.
Oh, someone else was telling me about that this morning. I put it on my list to watch.
So it was like 90 minutes of like my hands and feet dripping with sweat and probably my heart rate elevated. Oh my, I was so nervous the whole time. Um,
Anxiety by proxy.
it was crazy. Um, but so this guy, and I'm not going to give away the story, the full story, but he's a free climber. He doesn't climb with ropes, and he's climbed countless number of rock walls, solo and without ropes. And his biggest one was El Cap, and it's one that had never been free climbed before. But he didn't start there. He started on other walls, and if we were to say, well, we rolled out our enterprise analytics solution and now we're done, would be like him saying, well, I climbed this small little rock wall down in Utah, so now I'm done climbing.
Hmm.
That never was going to satisfy me. He's like, no, that was just one thing I wanted to conquer, and even that one thing, I didn't do it as well as I wanted to do, so I'm going to do it 15 more times. Then I'm going to move on to another one and another more challenging one. And I think that that's where organizations struggle, is they look at standing up an analytics solution as a one-time thing. I climbed the mountain and now I'm done. What am I going to do next? Like, I've done it. And that's where they get stuck in these doldrums of maintaining the current implementation, and it's very, very challenging if you look at it that way. But if you look at it as, I'm trying to achieve mastery of analytics, there's no way you can be done with that one time, right? Because that
Hmm.
one time wasn't good enough. You're gonna have to redo that one time multiple times, but that's just one mountain. There are other mountains out there to climb. And so that's really how I talk to organizations, as like, let's look at this more as mastery. And this is just one mountain we're looking at. And to be honest with you, this is one of the less technical challenges we've overcome. There's a lot more difficult ones out there. Let's aim for that. And if we can kind of put a pitch in for how we look at things at 33 Sticks, we've rolled out this methodology with our clients that we call the Matrix, that is focused on absolutely that. So if you think about how we look at that, not only are there multiple mountains in that matrix, there are multiple paths in each mountain. And so just because we've done it one way doesn't mean we've done it all the ways that we need to do it. And just because we've conquered one mountain doesn't mean we've conquered all of the mountains. And so
Hmm.
if you look at it that way, it really changes the conversation from, okay, I've bought something really, really cool, now I just have to focus on maintaining it, to, okay, now I'm doing something that's really, really difficult, and I have to keep doing it over and over again and finding different challenges so that I can reach a level of mastery that is going to make me fulfilled and is going to make the company much more successful.
Yeah, I like the term there, mastery. I haven't necessarily used that, so I'm going to add that to the vocabulary and how best to describe it, because I've gone in with a few clients and early on set the expectation that the implementation is never done. We're going to set some initial milestones that we need to hit to say, okay, the basics are up and running. The key items that you want to measure are up and running, but we're never done. And going forward, where we we want to get involved with product. That's the best way to. At least I found like one. I don't want to say best way. That's probably too strong. But one good way I found is describing, building a relationship with product that does keep your key stakeholders excited, so that you're involved with product, and analytics is a key portion of new features that's coming out. But yeah, I do like the term mastery. I'm going to add that to my list of words to use.
And I think it's such an important way to look at it, because until you start to strive for mastery, I don't think you're really in a great position to question what the right tool is for you to have. So think about things that you're passionate about. So for me, it's cooking. For other people, it may be sports. It may be playing baseball or hockey or soccer or whatever, or maybe painting, or maybe who knows what, right? But think about the thing that you're really passionate about, and think about how you've matured in that over time. And if you can project yourself backwards, were you in a place to really understand what tools were best for you? Now, you probably were more sucked into like what other people were doing and marketing to buy your initial tools. But so I'm going to use cooking. When I first started cooking, I had some ideas of what tools I wanted and what I needed, but I had no mastery. And so it was really just, what looks cool, what other people are using, what marketing is telling me to use. But now that I've been cooking for I don't know how many years, I've learned what works for me. I've achieved a certain level of mastery in things where I can say, you know what, for me, like a certain high-end vent hood in my kitchen is really, really important, and here's why: because of these things, or because of a certain cuisine I cook, this type of knife is really, really important to me. But I wouldn't know that until I've achieved some level of mastery with my skill to say, okay, this is the right tool set for me and what I'm trying to accomplish. And I think that's really, bringing it back to your initial question, talking about when's the right time to switch, that to me is the right time. All the other things are the wrong time. And we may not have as much control, especially with the first scenario I laid out. If, we're cutting costs and blah, 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 fine. If by all means we're like hanging on to our last thread, and if we, have to, it's either get rid of analytics or close down the company. Okay, let's have that conversation. But for most scenarios, it really should be about, have we invested the time to achieve a level of mastery where we can, with a very educated decision, choose what tools we're going to use. And again, unfortunately, that's not the case most of the times. It's either out of frustration. I'm frustrated with my current vendor, and so I'm switching. And we do that in our personal life all the time, right? Like, I hate my cell phone company. Everyone else is better. I'm like, it's not. I hate my cable provider. Everyone else is better. They're not. Right? You're going to switch, and like 3 months down the road, the honeymoon period's going to be over, and you're going to be frustrated again. And not saying switching is a bad thing, but again, it should come from a place of, I've achieved a certain level of mastery, and now I can make an educated decision to select a set of tools that best align with my needs as a practitioner, as a business. And that's really where I think the discussion should center.
So a funny personal story here. You were just talking about switching vendors in your personal life, and you mentioned cable company. My wife and I, we definitely fell victim to that. So had one cable provider, and it was decent. It got the job done. We had the TV channels that we wanted, all the services that we wanted, but we fell victim to the shiny object syndrome with another competitor in the market. They have voice activated remote, the really cool new dashboard, all of those kind of things. And we switched, and at first it was great. But then we started to notice with where we're at in relation to their network at peak times, like in the morning and in the evening, key channels were cutting out. I am talking like ABC, NBC, CBS. So my wife would have the news on in the morning as we're both getting ready to head out, and the channel would cut out. And we called to get it resolved, and ultimately it couldn't be resolved just based on the way the network was. And the solution was always, well, let's have someone come out. They come out and look, and everything's fine. I'm like, of course it's fine. You just put it in place 6 months ago. It's not like this has been up for 10 years and now this problem's starting. So we ended up moving back to who we had before, and I can think of like the shiny object and this neat little gadget, but at the roots it just didn't work.
Yeah, and it's very easy to do, and again, I think that tends to be the norm in businesses when it comes to switching tools, and it's frustrating because if you think about switching cable providers or things in your personal life, there's a cost to it, but relatively low. That's not the case with, enterprise level software. If you're making a switch, it's going to be very, very expensive.
Yes.
Not just the upfront cost of actually doing the switch, but everything that it impacts. So, now we've had several podcasts where we've talked about the importance of optimizing the customer experience and integrating tools across the MarTech stack, and all of these things are now interconnected. How do we rebuild all that? We've established a certain level of experience and expertise with the current setup, so now we're going to have to take a little step back and redevelop that on a new platform, and so we lose a little bit of innovation time and efficiency. So there's a big cost to making the switch. And again, not to say that you shouldn't make a switch, but you should do it for the right reasons. And the wrong reasons are, I'm angry at my current vendor, the grass is greener on the other side. All my friends are using this other cool platform that, has really fun commercials and marketing. The sales guy for this other vendor tells a really great story. All wrong reasons. Those are the absolute wrong reasons to switch. The right reasons are, I've really invested in, and I'm going to keep hammering on this term until people tell me to shut up, mastery, right? Like if we've really invested at becoming masters of our craft, and we've achieved a certain level of mastery, and now we're in a position to say, in order to get to that next more technical peak that I want to accomplish, unfortunately the tools I have now aren't good enough, and I'm in a position to be able to say that because I've done this hundreds of times, and I know exactly which tools I need to get to that more difficult challenge, and now I can go out and get that tool. But man, I've seen that happen very, very rarely. I don't know about you. It doesn't happen because most organizations don't reach that level of mastery, and I think a big part of it is the turnover.
Yes.
Because the knowledge and that experience does not stay within companies. And maybe this should probably be a separate podcast. We should talk about some ideas around how we combat that and help keep knowledge in companies. But with the turnover problem, the experience, the mastery leaves, and you have to start over, based on where the next person's mastery level comes in. And it's really challenging.
And that's actually... that was good, because one of the things I wanted to focus on for a few minutes is the lack of analytics leadership, because I think a lot of the wrong, and you mentioned this earlier, a lot of the wrong reasons we've listed as far as reasons to move to a new platform ultimately boil down to lack of analytics leadership. Whether it's there's not a strong leader there, so analytics is the first item that's cut when there's cost cutting, instead of, okay, let's hold on to this for as long as we can. You have that turnover, so there's always someone coming in and putting their stamp on it. And we spent a whole episode talking about that.
Yeah.
There's ultimately keys there. So, as an organization, what do you think are some ways? And again, this is something we're never going to be able to answer, because obviously this is a problem. But let's at least broach the topic of how do you build out strong analytics leadership so you don't fall victim to, say, the shiny object syndrome. Someone has a 4 or 5 year plan in place.
Well, I think it has to start with people, and setting the proper expectations, and part of it is honestly elevating digital within the organizations, and I think we're starting to see that happen. I saw a report, was it eMarketer? I'll have to go track it down. I'll put it in the show notes. that says that this year they believe their forecasting is the first year in which digital ad spend will outpace traditional.
Okay.
And to me, I see that as a potential tipping point where hopefully digital gets a bigger seat at the table in organizations. And digital overall, I think, has, but in many organization analytics, specifically digital analytics, hasn't. So if you look at a lot of companies that we've had the opportunity to see, not a lot of them have a voice at the C level, at the executive level in organizations. They're kind of capped within marketing. And I think that has to be a change in order to get stronger leadership into digital analytics roles or analytics roles overall. Is it needs to be set at a higher level within the organization. That, it doesn't matter how strong of a leader you bring in if you artificially keep them down in the organization, their influence is going to be minimized. Now, if they're a really strong leader, they can overcome some of that. But if they don't have the support of the company to sit at the higher levels within the organization, it's always going to be a challenge. So I think that's number one. And then number two is identifying the right type of leaders to come in and drive that change. And we've had the opportunity to work with some companies that have done that, and we've seen other companies from afar that have done that. But I think all too often, many companies struggle with hiring in this space, and they don't know who to hire, right? And so they hire a really great implementer and say, okay, you're now director of analytics. It's like, well, you're really good at implementing solutions, so therefore you should have a really strong grasp of strategy and where we want to. It's not always the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, instead of hiring like a really strong practitioner, you should hire someone that's an analytics leader. But again, I think organizations have a real challenge when trying to hire for this space, so they're just kind of grasping at what they can get. So in that sense, there's still a long way that we have to go from a maturity and mastery standpoint of getting the right level of leadership in companies. But I think if we do, it starts to solve a lot of problems. I think it definitely helps solve some of the leadership problems. It definitely helps solve some of the problems around turnover. Look at, I'm not going to name names, but I think you and I know of a certain company that we work with that has had really strong leadership for a long time, like many, many years, 5+ years. And just look at the difference in that level of leadership and other companies we've worked with where the manager of director analytics has turned over every 18 to 24 months. There's a huge...
There's a full reset.
Yeah, it's a full reset, and the gap between like those leadership skills is huge. And so hiring for those right skills, I think, is really, really important. But again, it's something that companies have just not achieved a level of mastery of identifying the right level of leadership required for analytics to properly drive a program. And we're seeing it's getting better. We are seeing some really good examples, but still something lots of companies struggle with. And I've had the opportunity. I'm fairly transparent and open on social about how we work and operate, and that causes people to feel really comfortable reaching out to me saying, hey, I'm in this situation. I have this challenge. Can we talk? And a lot of times it's really, really big companies, and they're saying things like, can I just pick your brain for 5 minutes about how we hire a VP of analytics? I'm like, you're massive company Y with billions of revenue. You're asking me, right? But it's really hard. They don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and I think then the other part of the problem too is you're looking at a company that's trying to find the right person to make sure they retain them for a long period of time, because it is a challenge making sure that they don't rapidly move on. But then on the flip side too is you have that kind of person come into an organization, and then they have an organization that doesn't necessarily see the value, so then they have an uphill battle in evangelizing not just analytics, but just data overall, the data integrity, how that feeds multiple systems, and how it has a direct impact on revenue.
Yeah. And I think that, and I know our topic is when to switch tools, but I think we've uncovered an even more valuable topic that really plays into that, in that if companies really want to get the maximum return out of these investments they're making in analytics, or said a different way, to get the maximum return of what they can get out of running a good analytics program within their company, it comes down to being focused on mastery, and that's like a completely different mindset than we see in most companies. Again, it's how quickly can we stand up a solution, how quickly can we do X, and it's not focused on the nuances of really mastering your craft. And I think it's just a sign of maturity. Again, think about anything that you've done in your life or things that you were interested about. When you start off, it's like you want to go a million miles an hour and explore every little thing, and it's new and it's exciting, and most things just kind of drop off when that newness wears off, and we see that with analytics. But those things that have stuck, the excitement isn't about the maintenance necessary of it, isn't about the newness of it, but it's about those little nuances of mastery that from the outside may look mundane, may look boring, but as a practitioner, of someone who's trying to achieve a high level of mastery, that's where the true passion and value and excitement of what you're doing really starts to come into play. So I think it's a massive shift in mentality that mastery of analytics is really where we want to be at, and let that inform switching tools, selecting the right tools, building the right team, rather than just being caught up in this immaturity is really the best way you can describe it, of just being excited about what we're doing in something new. That's easy. It's easy to be excited
to open
about
a new
that.
box.
Yeah. So you get lots of people starting new things. If we're going back to the mountain climbing analogy, lots of people get excited about that and start off and do a climb here and there. Very few people break through that wall, no pun intended, to really get to the point of finding the sheer enjoyment and exhilaration and ultimately getting to the top of the game through achieving a level of mastery. That's really what separates world class from everybody else.
And then kind of on the flip side too, we haven't touched on this too much, but I don't know if we have much more to add to it, but like on the flip side being the time to actually switch.
Yeah.
You've outgrown the tool. And I think, us talking about the lack of, say, analytics leadership or data governance leadership within your organization, they're constantly switching tools. I think also the lack of leadership there also leads to just constantly piling money, time, resources, effort into a system that no longer works.
Yeah.
If you don't have the proper leadership, they can't push up the organization. It's like, okay, we've outgrown this. It's time to move on. This is actually when we need to make the investment in the next step or the tool that's the next level up.
Yeah, and I think that's where making an informed decision about what's the true costs of switching, how long is it going to take for us to get back to a level where we're efficient again? Because it takes time. You don't go from one tool to the other and pick up exactly where you were. It doesn't matter how great the new tool is. There's a learning curve and there's downtime. So you are going to take a step backwards. So having the proper leadership to help figure out that equation of the true cost of switching, and are the efficiencies we're going to gain and the level of mastery we're going to be able to achieve higher, that are going to justify that. I mean, that's really the thought process that you need to go through. And on a much smaller level, I recently switched email platforms. So I switched my day-to-day. I switched from Google Mail, Gmail, which has been my go-to for my work email for 5+ years, to a new platform called Superhuman. And there was a learning curve to it. And for the first week, it was so much slower. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is frustrating me. But I knew, and I had, got to a certain level of understanding of how I use email, that I had capped, what I could do in Gmail. And I'm like, it's just taking far too much time for me to manage my inbox. So I'm going to make a switch to Superhuman. And I know it's going to be difficult for the first week because it's going to be a learning curve. And I'm going to actually be slower than I was before. But I know after that first week, I'm going to achieve a certain level of efficiency that's going to pay off. Right. And now I'm at that point where it's like, I can't even think about doing it in Gmail. I'm so much faster in this new platform. And the same is true for analytics or any other platform. Is you have to be at a certain place where you can make that educated decision to say, You know what? We've done some amazing things with Google Analytics. Um, we've reached a point where, in order to get to the level of mastery we want to get to, we believe we need to switch over to the Adobe Experience Cloud, and we're going to bring in analytics and audience manager and target, and it's probably going to be a step back for 6 to 9 months in our organization. And that's going to have some cost because it is going to slow things down. It's going to be some additional cost for us to get there. But in month 12, the graph just goes off the chart because we're now not only, more efficient in climbing the current mountain we're on, we can tackle some much more technical things that or tactical things that we couldn't do before. Um, and so and it could be on the other foot. I'm not saying that Google to Adobe is the natural transition. It could be Adobe to Google. It could be Google to Snowplow. It could be, who knows. Like it's less important to me about the product, because it's more that product offering should be more aligned to your business needs and challenges, and not a one size fits all. Here's the progression in analytics maturity. So I don't want any of the Google fanboys jumping on me for saying that. That's not what I intended. But it needs to come from a place of being informed. Of, I know how this works. I'm now in a position to say, I need to move to tool X because it's going to give me the best possible scenario to achieve the level of mastery for myself and my organization that I'm looking for. And that has to, again, come out of a place of experience and not out of a place of, I'm frustrated with my current provider. The grass is greener on the other side. All the cool kids are using this other solution. Not good reasons to be making a switch.
Yeah, it's actually slowing down and not falling into, some kind of, being pulled into some kind of faster pace by someone else, whether that's, a sales rep, someone in the organization saying we need an answer to this. It's actually slowing down the situation.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that's hard to do. We like to run fast, but again, I hate to keep coming back to sports analogies because I can just
I was about to use one.
I could just imagine some of our readers or some of our listeners saying, "Enough with the sports ball." But there's so many good analogies to it, and one of the things in mastery of athletics is they say that the game starts to slow down for you. And I was never a top athlete. I couldn't make the jump from high school to collegiate athletics, but I played tennis in high school. I made it to number 2 ranking. So in tennis, you have 5 people on a team. You have the top 3 singles players, and then you have 7 people. Top 3 singles players, and then 2 teams of doubles players.
Oh, nice.
And that's your ranking 1 through 7 determines where you sit. So I made it to number 2.
Oh, that's cool.
And my senior year, things just the whole processing slowed down for me, and I could see it at a much different speed. And they say that about quarterbacks in football or point guards in basketball, right? Like, as you've achieved a certain level, the game just slows down for you, and you see things and can process things so much faster and better. I think that's true in this situation as well. As you've achieved that certain level of mastery, things just start to slow down, and you're able to take a much more and better view of your environment and make that decision rather than making a rash. Okay, there's a 300-pound linebacker coming at me. I just got to throw the ball. That's the I'm just going to switch providers choice instead of saying, okay, I see him coming. I'm going to step back and let him run by me, and then I'm going to make a choice of who to throw to. That's the smart way to do it.
Yeah. No, and I was thinking of that same analogy where watching the NHL, Peter Forsberg, he was probably the best at that. You could just watch him, and you could tell he slowed the game down to the pace that he needed it, and he was 2 thoughts ahead of anybody else, and he was the absolute best at doing that. And I mean, I use it just on a very micro level with it, with myself when things start to get crazy. In the form of just requests coming in from clients, from other work that needs to get done. It's like, the natural tendency is to speed up and rush and try to get as much done, but trying to actually slow it down. It's like, imagine yourself as that athlete that can slow it down, read the defense, and know exactly what to do and be 2 steps ahead of somebody.
It's true, and I'm a huge I was a huge Avalanche fan,
Hmm.
so I got to watch a lot of Peter Forsberg. But yeah, you're right. And it is the organizations that we've seen that are really doing things from a high level from an analytics perspective. That's where they get to, and if that's if you can get to that point, and we can have a really informed discussion about the right tool sets for the organizations, those are the conversations I love to have. And honestly, I think the vendors would as well. Love to have that conversation from a very informed perspective. I think all of us get frustrated having that conversation where it's just rash decision making. So, how do we get there? We're talking a lot, and we're kind of running out of time on this episode. But maybe that's a follow up. Like,
It is.
how do we get to that level of mastery so we're not having this discussion of why are companies making rash decisions to switch tools, and how do we get to a place of mastery so if we are making those decisions it's from a very informed place.
Hmm. I'm just making a note here. We'll definitely follow up on that one because I think that's a conversation in and of itself, and I think that's also one where everyone's going to have their own way of doing it. But yeah, I think that'll be a good follow up one.
Yep, for sure. So how do we want to wrap this one up? I think this has been good. I think it was a little challenging to not have a third person in the conversation. So this is kind
Yeah.
of new. Hope the cadence was good for everyone. And just as a little insight for those who are listening, this is the first time that we're actually doing this on video internally, so we can see each other, and that's added a different level of dynamic. It's almost like going back to some of our first episodes where there was I'm a little more nervous recording this episode, knowing that we can see each other as we're recording.
No, actually, I found it to be a bit better. I think that there was a bit smoother of a flow with it. So you want to talk about switching tools? We're actually piloting a new one, recording this episode
Yeah.
that integrates video during the conversation, and I mean, so far I liked it. I think it made the flow easier, it made the transition easier, and it made the back and forth easier because I know at times when before in previous episodes, like we'd be waiting to see who was going to jump
Yeah.
in and answer.
Well, yeah, well, we didn't have those nonverbal cues because we couldn't see each other. And, I'm in Utah, you're in Philly, John's in Bangkok, and we're just hearing voices. So, that's some of those pauses in the conversation is we're just trying to not step over each other. And I think one of the things we're trying to accomplish with this podcast is just have natural communication. And the goal for the video was we thought it might be fun that some weird people that are our listeners may want to see us talk. And so we were going to throw a feed at some point in the future on YouTube if they wanted to see a behind the scenes of the recording. But I actually think the more value coming out of this is the fact that this is hopefully going to enhance that natural conversation, because now there's not this I say something, you say something, I say something. We're kind of blending into each other because we can pick up on those nonverbal cues. So
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think here's how we wrap it up. So we're using, and it's just purely by coincidence, by the way. This was not planned. It's been something on my list to look into. But really, I think it goes back to like, when's the time to switch tools? And the previous recording tool, got the job done when we were getting started.
Yeah.
Because we're coming up on a year
Has it been a year?
doing this. May.
Dude, that's crazy. And we've
It
stuck to doing an episode every Friday. That should be celebrated. That's
Consistency.
pretty cool for sure.
Yeah.
Consistency.
No, I'm
Mastery.
planning. I'm planning out what we're going to talk about during that anniversary episode. But no, kind of coming back to it, I was actually thinking of this podcast when you were talking about mastery earlier. I mean, my God, I can't even listen to the first couple episodes because they're just like, you could tell, like the minute the record button was hit,
we clammed up.
we became way too serious about it. And that was not the goal. The whole genesis of this was we have some really fun conversations. I wonder if people will listen to it if we were to record it. But then we finally started to feel, get a nice flow down, but then still we wanted to get even better. It was never saying, okay, what we're what we've done up till now is the best we're going to do. It's where do we go from here? And I'm like, we need to find a way to even be more natural. So let's put an item on our list to look for tools that can integrate video for two different reasons. Like you were saying, the video feed, but then also just, helping with the recording session.
Yeah.
So I think that we could wrap it up with this example where we just didn't switch tools because there was something that looked great. Because we did pilot a couple other tools early on, and we just found that like every remote podcast recording tool I found has its own set of bugs and quirks and whatever. We just didn't switch because one was, say, shinier than the other. We actually, I think, we're looking to move to this new recording tool purely because it gives us greater functionality where we can take this podcast, I think, and further refine it.
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, it was unplanned, but I think a really good coincidence that we're on this new tool today, because I think it highlights the way that we think, and what our recommendation is that, to your point, we didn't just switch to switch. We didn't switch because we were upset at our other platform or this new one has some cool shiny new features. We've been doing this for a year every week, and sometimes recording multiple times a week, and we've achieved a certain level of mastery with doing this. And that's not to say we don't have a long way to go. We do, but we're in a much better position to make an informed choice on selecting a tool that will help us get to that next summit that we're after. So great way to wrap it up.
Yep. Cool. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up at that point, and we'll catch everybody later.
Thanks, Jim. Miss you, John.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.